This sepia-toned landscape of modern Jerusalem marks the exact site of one of the ancient world's most ambitious construction efforts. It began exactly 480 years after the Exodus. The dimensions for Solomon's temple were precise: 60 cubits long, 20 wide, and 30 high. Since a cubit is based on a human forearm, this wasn't a modest chapel. It was a solid stone structure roughly the height of a 4-story building. Yet for a project of this scale, the construction site was eerily quiet. The historical record notes that no hammer, axe, or any iron tool was heard at the temple site while it was being built. This silence suggests that the temple wasn't just a feat of engineering. The absence of noise turned the site into a demonstration of how true worship is structured. To achieve that silence, the logistics had to be flawless. As we can see in this vintage photograph of an ancient quarry, every massive stone had to be fully chiseled and finished at a distant site before it ever touched the Temple Mount. This meant each block arrived on site ready to slot into place immediately. There was no room for error and no possibility for on-site adjustments. The question is why Solomon would choose such a difficult, expensive path. Why demand total silence during a massive industrial project? Solomon's focus was on the physical perfection of the site, but God's response was immediate and surprising. He stated that the majesty of the architecture itself would never be enough to guarantee his presence. The purpose of the temple wasn't to house the divine in a physical container. Instead, the rigorous, silent construction served as a real-time test of human obedience to God's instructions. God gave Solomon a single, clear condition. He would dwell among the people only if they remained strictly obedient to his laws and commandments. There is a telling detail in the text of 1 Kings. Immediately after God speaks these words, the record simply notes that Solomon finished building the temple. There is no mention of Solomon praying or even acknowledging what God had just said. The narrative moves straight from God's warning back to the construction details, suggesting a subtle but dangerous shift in Solomon's priorities. He was becoming more invested in the work of the project than in the relationship that the project was supposed to represent. It's a warning that remains relevant. When external religious metrics and the business of worship take center stage, the actual presence of God is often the first thing to be crowded out. This interior priority is reflected in the temple's finish. Solomon imported massive quantities of cedar, like the tall, resilient trees shown here, to line the entire interior. The architectural instructions were absolute. There was no stone seen. Every inch of the rock was covered by wood paneling. This wood was overlaid with pure gold and carved with cherubim, palm trees, and flowers, motifs mirroring the Garden of Eden. Throughout the biblical text, unhewn stone is often used to represent raw human nature, the old self that remains unchanged. By hiding every trace of stone beneath gold and Edenic imagery, the design demonstrates that the human ego has no place in the sanctuary. In this environment, the raw human self is meant to be completely eclipsed by divine holiness and grace. Eventually, the physical majesty of Solomon's project came to an end. Today, as this archaeological site shows, only the weathered stone foundations remain. But the New Testament suggests the building didn't fail, it simply changed form. It claims that the physical temple is now obsolete because the people themselves have become the structure. The book of 1 Peter describes believers as living stones. Our individual lives are the raw materials being used to build a new kind of spiritual dwelling. And just like those ancient stones in the quarry, these living stones must go through a specific process of breaking and shaping before they are ready for the final assembly. The ancient rules of Solomon's construction site provided the foundational logic for how spiritual communities are shaped today, not through on-site noise, but through off-site preparation. For us, the quarry is everyday life. It's in the quiet trials and the daily choices of obedience where our raw nature is chiseled and our pride is broken. This stands in stark contrast to the loud, ego-driven noise that often defines modern religious life. We often prioritize the show of the building site over the quiet work of the quarry. A healthy spiritual community functions like those ancient blocks. People arrive already shaped by their personal obedience, fitting together with friction or the clashing of human wills. When the human ego is kept hidden, the only thing left to see is the quiet, steady reflection of something far greater than ourselves. The strength of a spiritual community isn't measured by the volume of its activity, but by the quiet, obedient transformation of its living stones.